So there's a lot of hype over the new GPUs that are coming out, but I actually think if you're looking to build a PC towards the end of the year or at the start of next year, it's actually the previous gen stuff that is a little bit more exciting. Bottom line is that the prices that you can get these cards for now is extremely good, like below MSRP in some cases, and they can play pretty much anything. I mean, the types of games that most people are playing at like 1080p, 1440p, medium settings, RTX 3000 and Radeon 6000 GPUs can handle that stuff without a sweat. Now, I don't want this video to take away from the ridiculous power of the RTX 4080 and the 4090. I mean, these things are just insane, and it is pretty crazy to see games running at 4K max graphics with ray tracing enabled. And yeah, at the $1,200 and $1,600 price point, these are substantially faster than the previous gen GPUs like the 3080 Ti and the 3090. But how many of you actually have a 4K 144Hz monitor? How many of you actually play with your games completely maxed out in terms of graphic settings? Because realistically, that's what it's going to take to kind of notice the difference and notice the upgrade experience for these kind of GPUs. This is one of the main reasons that in my 4080 and 4090 review, I had so much focus on things like the new frame generation feature and the new dual NVENC encoder. It's because these are some of the biggest actual differences between the old stuff and the new stuff. I mean, the fact that you can now run Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 200 FPS instead of 100 FPS, I could show you graphs like that all day, but let's be real, who actually cares to run those games at those sort of frame rates? Let alone at 4K max settings. But the fact that you can now bypass CPU bottlenecks with fake frames in certain games, that's simply something that you couldn't do on previous generations. Now, if you're not interested in those features, but you still want to pick up a 4080 or a 4090, then that is completely fine, but I just also hope that you have a 4K 144Hz monitor and that you also play games completely maxed out in terms of graphic settings, because that's kind of what it's going to take to notice a difference between something like this and something like this. Now, we're not talking 1440p high settings, right? That stuff is demanding in its own right, but it can be done quite easily on a previous gen GPU. We're talking 4K completely cranked to the max on some of the most demanding games that you can think of. That's really what cards like the 4080 and 4090 are for. Now, of course, games will become more demanding in the future, and that's where you'll be able to see the true potential of a 4080 or a 4090. And, you know, I'm definitely not trying to make you feel bad if you bought a 40 series GPU. Hopefully you're enjoying it. I'm just saying that for most people's setups and for most of the games that most people play, the previous gen stuff is looking really good, especially for the kind of money that you can get these for. Now, AMD has announced the Radeon 7000 series GPUs, which are kind of a bit of an answer to the 4080 and the 4090, but realistically, how different is it to what we have on the table here? I mean, they're still $1,000 300 watt plus GPUs. A lot of people are kind of calling them the answer and the savior to the kind of GPU market at the moment and these very expensive GPUs. But let's be real with ourselves, they're still very expensive GPUs, and I do think they're still going to be quite overpowered for most people's setups. So the previous gen stuff is looking pretty good at the moment, and let's take a look at what kind of pricing you can expect to pay. Some of you might recognize these price charts from previous videos. The colored dots indicate the current pricing for each GPU, and the white dots indicate the card's MSRP. Here we're looking at the US market, where I've taken the average of the lowest 3 listings. Now let's crop out the expensive stuff and focus on the cards below the $800 mark. That's really where the sweet spot is at the moment. So in general for the US market, RTX 3000 is still slightly above MSRP, but Radeon 6000 is way below. Now, since Micro Center doesn't show which cards are in stock and which ones are not, it's hard to verify what you'll actually pay here. Having said that, this method has worked pretty nicely in the past. So realistically, anything from a 6600 XT to a 3080 is worth considering here at these new prices, but Radeon 6000 is the real standout here. I mean, 6700 XT for example, under $400 for that thing is a really good deal. Now, I do think that US pricing is accurate because it is actually a pretty similar trend to what we see in the UK, where Overclockers UK does show which cards are in stock and which ones aren't. Just as in the US, Radeon 6000 over here has seen the biggest price cuts, where a 6750 XT you can get for around £460, which is a really sweet deal. If you prefer the Nvidia side of things, both the 3060 Ti and 3070 are looking like the better picks. Overall though, pricing is looking really good. You definitely don't have to spend ridiculous money to get a decent gaming rig up and running. You will, however, pay a bit more than other regions if you're in the European market. Over at Case King, for example, basically everything is a bit more on the expensive side. 6700 XT then again looks like the most sensible pick if you're after the most value for money. It's 100 euros less than the 3070 and about 5 to 10% slower on average depending on the game. And then finally, PC Case Gear here in Australia, and oddly enough we might just have at the best pricing overall, which I think that's the first time I've ever said that. At least when looking at the mid-range stuff, a 3070 for 790 AUD, that's equivalent to just 530 USD at the moment. And again, we do see that Radeon 6000 overall has dropped a bit more in price compared to RTX 3000. Here the 6700 XT is cheaper than a 3060 Ti, despite being the faster GPU. Now something really important to note here is that it's typically the cards in the middle of the graphs that seem to be the better picks. You know, super cheap GPUs off to the left there, like the 6500 XT and the 3050, they don't have the performance that you'd expect from a 2022 GPU. And if we're looking at 3070 Ti and upwards, that's probably at the point where you might want to wait around for a 4070 or similar. Also, what you're seeing is the average of the lowest 2 in-stock listings, and in many cases, it's totally possible to find cheaper models listed online than the prices that you're seeing here. That's especially the case if you're considering buying something used or secondhand. At that point, you can take a further $100 to $200 off of these prices. Now, for those wondering if you should kind of wait around for a 4070 or a 4060 or similar, then yeah, that's definitely a possibility. I'd always recommend waiting if you can. If you're not in a rush to build anything or upgrade, then definitely wait. But I don't think you will see anything around the $400 to $500 price point for quite a while. I think AMD and Nvidia still need to release their $700 GPUs, and in the case of AMD, they still need to release GPUs regardless around that $1,000 price point. But for sure, if you were going to buy a 3080 or a 6800 XT for like $700 or $800, then I'd probably recommend waiting if you can. But if you're going to look at the more mid-range stuff, the lower end stuff, you know, $400, $500, 3070 or similar, then I think those are still going to look like pretty good deals even in the next few months. And again, don't feel bad for buying previous gen hardware. Don't feel like it's the old stuff. It's still very powerful hardware. Cards like the 3060 Ti, 6700 XT, and 3070 are a seriously good pairing with a 1440p monitor. These GPUs didn't suddenly get slower when the 40 series came out, and I think that's a really important note. And let's not forget, most of these cards are smaller form factors with standard power connectors. That's another trade-off that you'll need to worry about with the newer hardware. So previous gen GPUs, they are the meta right now. They're way more exciting in terms of price to performance in my opinion, and they play pretty much everything that you'd want. I'll leave some links down below in the description if you want to check the pricing or possibly pick one up. As always, a huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.